So I found this quite interesting. Basically, picked a couple of radical men's rights activists' threats, generalized them, as always, and then boom, we have ourselves a clickbait-type headline. Good people, as it turns out, every day is International Men's Day, and as such, you should stop complaining out there. Of course, we also hear radical feminists who say some of the craziest things, but cancel culture is for a very specific group of people. For instance, this is a quote from Marilyn's French novel, The Women's Room, which was published in 1977. This has really aged well as we get closer and closer to achieving it, especially because of the tremendous effort behind it characterized by the constant expansion of the definition of rape and sexual assault. For instance, steering is sexual assault according to UN Women. Rape as a result of being too drunk to consent only applies to women, and we are now moving to a place where consent can be taken back even years after intercourse has occurred, which is where India basically is according to what is defined as rape in the country. Now, if each of our ex-girlfriends and or ex-wives took back their consent, then that would make all men rapists. So considering that this is, to a certain degree radical, offensive, and misandrist, should it be used in discrediting the entire feminist movement and explanation for canceling anything or any day related to International Women's Day? Considering what criminal justice looks like, could we conclude that every day is International Women's Day? Considering what family court looks like, could we say every day is International Women's and Mother's Day? So, should men be appreciated or celebrated for doing household chores? A follow-up question, in this case, is, should women be celebrated, including being labeled as independent, for covering bills? Well, different people have different takes on the whole idea of men being appreciated for doing housework. For instance, Sundaram questions why it is assumed that women should take up the bulk of the housework even though she is working, why a man doing housework is a big deal, why men are to a certain degree appreciated for doing housework while women are not, why only women are taught house chores growing up, and why men are seeing women in the workplace while women are not seeing men at home. Rajendran criticizes the Colors TV ad that advocates for Sunday being her holiday by arguing that, instead of benevolence, women require men's support on a daily basis, and making an omelette 4 days in a month is not such a big deal. The author further explains that all the woman does is her work, with his work being only to watch, and celebrating men who do housework reinforces the idea that this is how it should have been from the beginning. Finally, the author concludes that Sunday as her holiday campaign is offensive to women and portrays men as selfish and insensitive people who are incapable of doing basic tasks that a fully functioning adult is required to do. Valenti observes that men are always let off the hook when it comes to parenting because they are not doing enough. Women's second shift outside formal employment is unpaid care work. Men are not held accountable for perceiving housework as optional, and accepting that women staying at home is more fulfilling is based on the assumption mothering is the actual goal for women. Which leads to the perception that men taking care of their kids as babysitting. I doubt that arguments against mothers being the primary caregivers ever come up in family court, but oh well. May argues we need to stop advising women to just ask for help from lazy husbands because men drive in immaculate cars, work in tidy offices, overachieve in places where they are compared with other men or earn, supposedly become stupid helpless at home, and are not circus animals who do tricks upon their master's command. All this, the author argues, is promoted by some victim blaming by some self-righteous women. Then there's the Colegio Monte Castelo of Spain that has a home economics class specifically designed to teach young boys housework as an approach to stopping gender inequality. So in the institution, boys are taught both traditionally masculine and feminine roles. The teaching ranges from cooking, ironing, cleaning, and sewing, to electrical, carpentry, plumbing, and masonry skills. A combination of all these skills is not only important for when the boys start their families, but also for the period between when they leave the nest and when they settle down. The whole idea is to help young boys develop into well-functioning adults and capable partners and fathers, thereby solving gender inequality. The home economics class made the school popular as it was lauded as an egalitarian institution. Now, this institution really caught my eye for obvious reasons, that might not be so obvious for others, but put a pin on it. We'll get back to it later on. Bielski cites the book How Can I Be Your Lover When I'm Too Busy Being Your Mother by Sarah Dimmerman and, emphasis on the male co-author, J. M. Kearns, in arguing that intimacy is a casualty when women are required to work full-time and do household chores. According to the book, men today are doing more housework than they did in the 60s, still not enough. House-proud and gatekeeping wives significantly contribute to the inequality in housework by chastising their sloth-like husbands. Wives sabotage men's involvement in housework by accusing them of incompetence. Men doing more housework translates into women giving up their power within the home. Female partners do not want to give up control in their homes because part of it involves instinctive selection by the children. Women sitting back instead of nagging could increase the amount of housework done by men since they will not have to be bossed. Men perceive gatekeeping wives as control freaks. Offering sex after involvement in domestic work is perceived as a charity, and men should link their poor attitudes towards housework to their sorry sex lives. The sorry sex life is supported by this article by Robertson Einstein, which highlights the use of sex as a reward for doing housework. The article references Bree Dietz's revelation that the husband gets lucky if he helps with the housework, cites an unattached Cornell University study which claims that men who helped more with at least a third of housework enjoyed more time in clean sheets, and document a few more anecdotes of sex being used to negotiate more involvement in housework by a partner. Could this be the reason why your partner always says she's tired? Imagine a world where men link or peg their familial roles to intimacy, in such a way that, if his intimacy-related needs are not met, then he's not covering the bills at home or doing any of his responsibilities. Now, instead of intimacy being a treat for doing housework, men actually set the standard of intimacy being a treat for undertaking the roles of paying the rent, getting the groceries, and covering the utilities, all of which facilitate the completion of housework. Actually, men pegging their traditionally masculine roles to their biological intimacy requirements is often referred to as entitlement to women's bodies. Just for the record, this friction comes from men not taking up traditional feminine roles at the rate at which women take up traditional masculine roles, with women working today being associated with the efforts of the feminist movement, proper sanitation for that time of the month, and invention of the birth control pill. Anyway, away from opinions, what is the relationship between splitting household chores and intimacy? The study by Conrich and colleagues used data from the second wave of the national surveys of families and households to investigate the relationship between egalitarianism, housework, and the frequency of coitus in marriage. Particularly, the study examined the effect of men's participation in traditionally feminine and traditionally masculine roles on the frequency of coitus in marriage. The study uncovered that couples that adopted traditional housework arrangements reported a higher frequency of engaging in coitus. Based on the finding, the authors concluded that gender display, rather than marital exchange, is more important for the frequency of coitus in marriage. This study is often linked to Lori Gottlieb's article in the New York Times Magazine in 2014, which resulted in the conclusion that more egalitarian marriages translated to less coitus through the phrase, and I quote, "In an attempt to be gender neutral, we may have become gender neutered." Critics of Gottlieb's feature argue that the feature relied on anecdotes and observations, was a classical case of scholarly opinions, and relied heavily on the findings of Conrich and colleagues' study. Critics of Conrich's study cite that the study used old data that was collected in the 90s when very few unions had equality and the economic context was different, as well as the elimination of childcare and cohabiting relationships from the study. Gottlieb notes that correlations do not always establish causation and the fact that not much has changed in terms of the core housework completed by couples. Two studies have been presented as counters to Conrich and colleagues' study and Gottlieb's conclusions. This study by Geiger and Yabiku examined the effect of time availability, gender ideology, and the multiple spheres perspective on the frequency of coitus. The study uncovered that couples who spent more time in both paid and unpaid work reported a higher frequency of engaging in coitus. Bearing in mind that men spend more time in paid work and women spend more time in unpaid work, doesn't this study support the one by Conrich and colleagues? Especially considering that an actual 50-50 division of paid and unpaid work in a union is difficult if not impossible. This other study by Carlson and colleagues used more recent data from the 2006 Marital and Relationships Survey, categorized relationships into traditional, egalitarian, and counter-conventional where the man did most of the housework and included the division of labor among cohabiting couples. The survey largely involves younger, middle-income couples, with young children at home. The study uncovered, and I quote, "We find no significant differences in sexual frequency and satisfaction among conventional or egalitarian couples. Couples where the male partner does the majority of the housework, however, have less frequent and lower quality sexual relationships than their counterparts. These findings are indicative of the existence of sexual scripts even as couples become more egalitarian." This study by Pew Research ranks sharing household work third, behind faithfulness and a happy sexual relationship, among the determinants of a successful marriage. Now, how withholding intimacy contributes to a happy sexual relationship is beyond me. And actually, more men and unmarried people report the importance of sharing chores to a happy marriage. Bowen says she thanks her husband for doing housework because it is the kind thing to do. She says she's glad she does not have to clear the crawling objects in the walls and thanks her husband for doing it, while he thanks her for preparing dinner every night. She advocates for partners appreciating each other's strengths and weaknesses in a relationship because unions can be difficult and isolation could make them worse. Jess Alberts and Angela Trethewey argue that beyond dividing household chores, successful relationships require partners to express gratitude for each other's contributions. Expressing gratitude for work done is way more important than the actual division of labor. An imbalance in the combination of paid and unpaid labor always causes dissatisfaction for one partner in the relationship. The researchers argue that the evidence from surveys, interviews, and focus groups involving heterosexual and same-sex relationships suggests that lack of gratitude is a contributor to the unequal distribution of labor, and gratitude goes a long way into solving the problem. The researchers also assert that a partner's response threshold determines who will perform a specific task. The response threshold is defined as the degree of disorderliness that leads to a partner noticing that a task is undone. Lower response thresholds result in doing more housework. This phenomenon also exists in bees, where certain bees almost always respond to a drop of honey in the hive. Failing in a task or lacking the opportunity to attend to it, because the one with a lower response threshold handles it quick enough, reducing the likelihood of one performing the task. Sociologist Arlie Hochschild, who pioneered the economy of gratitude theory, explains that people in relationships often exchange gifts, and to a certain degree, the recipient of a gift often feels entitled. For example, if housework is perceived to be designated for one partner, the other one does not see the need to be grateful. Some partners believe that Valentine's Day is for them to receive and not to give. Smith maintains that men are worse than women at being grateful because of traditional stereotypes that impose housework on women. Men withhold gratitude as an expression of power over women because it implies indebtedness and dependency. There are men who are better at expressing gratitude than women. Men whose competency at home is challenged by wives denigrate their contributions in the home, and it is commonplace for full-time caregivers to withhold gratitude from full-time breadwinners, a phenomenon that the author does not explain why. A study by Anesi and colleagues uncovered, and I quote, "The powerful were more likely to believe that the favors they received were offered for the favor giver's instrumental purposes, thereby reducing power holders' thankfulness, desire to reciprocate, and trust." Instrumental attributions for favors in marriages led to lower levels of reported relationship commitment among high-power spouses. Favors are critical in triggering power holders' diminished trust. Alberts and Trethewey observe that gratitude reminds the underperforming partner that the overperforming partner's contributions are gifts, and the obligation by the underperforming partner to reciprocate promotes the exchange of gifts. According to the economy of gratitude, marriages where partners acknowledge each other's overperformance report greater satisfaction. Alberts and Trethewey suggest that anticipating problems before they arise reduces resentment. Overperformers should avoid repeating the same task, especially during the first days of a union. Overperformers should appreciate instead of criticizing underperformers, and alternating tasks around the house reduces ownership. Tasks around the house could be masculine or feminine. We'll cover that a bit later on. Any society that expects women to do most of the housework also expects men to cover most of the bills, both expectations holding true despite the fact that both the man and the woman in a union could be working. This being the case, if it is widely accepted that her money is her money and his money is their money, shouldn't it be accepted that his resting time is his resting time and her resting time is their resting time? The perception of men doing housework as helping out is also the case with women covering bills within the home, that is, they are also helping out. One is a problem, the other is not. Then there is the whole discussion around the gender pay gap, where on average, men earn more than women and is often described as a great source of inequality. Various factors have been identified as contributing to the pay gap that will be discussed in later videos. For this video, let's briefly highlight the number of working hours by gender. So this study by Bianchi and colleagues points out a couple of interesting things, including, the amount of time women spend on housework has declined between 1965 and 2010. The amount of time men spend doing housework doubled between 1965 and the turn of the century. Women do 1.6 times more housework than men. Wives do 1.7 times more housework than husbands. and married mothers do 1.9 times more housework than married fathers. The amount of time women spend in doing core housework has remained the same, while men's has risen, with this rise being associated with an increase in the size of houses, the prominence in home renovation, and the complexity of managing house finances. With regard to the number of hours worked spent doing chores, women did 26 hours of housework in 1976 and 17 in 2005, while men did 6 hours of housework in 1976 and 13 in 2005. Then there's this report by the Institute for Women's Policy Research. The report revealed that the time women spend in paid work has significantly gone up by an average of 9 hours, while it has remained steady for men between 1977 and 2016. This finding is the same for fathers and mothers, with the amount of time spent in paid work for mothers having significantly gone up, while it has remained the same for fathers. So, fathers today work approximately the same number of hours they did in the 60s and 70s, plus the amount of housework they do has doubled today. Still not good enough. Of course, when it comes to talking about equality or inequality in the home, those who say women take time off of work to do housework, always ignore the fact that the presence of children affects men way more than women, at least in terms of working hour. Women with children work an average of 3 less hours than those without children, while men with children work an average of 7 more hours. Combining paid and unpaid labor for mothers and fathers uncovers that fathers work 2 more hours than mothers, but who's counting? This study by Lionette and Crompton uncovered, and I quote, on average, men whose partners earn more than they do carry out more housework than other men, although women in these partnerships still do more. However, these women actively contest their male partners' lack of input, simultaneously doing and undoing gender. The article also identifies class differences in the sharing of domestic work. This other study by Kahn and Laurie revealed, and I quote, the share of housework shows less variation, with women having an average share of around 70% even though significant differences across ethnic groups remain. Black Caribbean men have the least traditional gender attitudes of any group, possibly due to matriarchal family structures within Afro-Caribbean cultures. Indian men and other Asian men spend more hours on housework than their white British counterparts, even though Indian, Pakistani, and Bangladeshi women spend significantly more time on housework than white British women. More egalitarian domestic labor arrangements are significantly associated with having a degree for women, as is having a spouse with a degree, and more liberal gender attitudes for both men and women. Being in paid employment reduces housework hours on average for men and women, but the share of women's housework is only reduced on average if the woman is employed. Our study shows that gender inequality in the domestic division of labor can be lessened by higher educational attainment and women being in employment, even though the intersection between gender and ethnicity and domestic labor varies across ethnic groups. Now, this panel study of income dynamics funded by the National Science Foundation used data collected in 2005 in uncovering that on a weekly basis, women of all ages without children complete 10 hours of housework before marriage and 17 hours after marriage, while men of all ages without children complete 8 hours of housework before marriage and 7 hours after marriage. Of special interest is how the study defines housework, and I quote, according to the study, housework was defined as core chores, or routine housework that people generally do not enjoy doing, such as washing dishes, laundry, vacuuming floors, and dusting. Routine housework, like cooking dinner or making beds, was captured in diaries, the primary tool used for the study of time allocation. Researchers supplemented the diaries with data from questionnaires asking both men and women to recall how much time they spent on basic chores in an average week. Other activities such as home repairs, mowing the lawn, and shoveling snow were not in the study. Items such as gardening are usually viewed as more enjoyable. The focus here is on core housework. So according to the study, cooking and cleaning are not enjoyable, but shoveling snow, mowing the lawn, hauling air conditioners, unclogging toilets, grouting, repainting rooms, removing cobwebs around ceilings and bulbs, crawling through tiny spaces to do basic plumbing, and basic services on the car or cars, very enjoyable, and hence does not count as housework or unpaid labor. If this is how unpaid labor is defined, then clearly we have ourselves some situation. Back to that school in Spain that got me curious. So at first, I thought it's an all-boys institution. I don't speak Spanish, so I went to Facebook, searched for the institution, and this is what came up. Seems like it's an all-rounded institution with young children and young adults. Of special interest was this image, which could be an indication that the institution also has female learners, unless of course, they were coming to visit for a function. So the question is, why is the home economics program only targeting young male adults and teaching them to be fully functioning adults? How about young female adults? Shouldn't they also learn masonry, plumbing, and electrical skills to be fully functioning adults? These questions are based on the assumption that young female adults are not being taught traditionally masculine roles. The assumption is based on the observation that those who champion for teaching men basic life skills, or traditionally feminine roles, from a young age always choose to ignore teaching women traditionally masculine roles from a young age. And this is what they call achieving true equality, where men are required to learn both masculine and feminine roles, while women are not required to learn traditionally masculine roles, at least around the home. Wouldn't true equality focus on making both men and women fully functioning adults? Sundaram argues that no one tells men that in doing housework, they are doing what they should have been doing for years, but they were not. Well, is anyone telling women that paying bills is something that adults have been doing for centuries, and hence the whole independence or boss lady title is meaningless because paying their own bills is what adults do? Of course, in comes the patriarchy that did not quote-unquote allow women to work, and neither did it allow men to do housework because they were required and still are required to work in attending to their providing roles. But we know where the focus is in such matters.